From the earliest days of my memory, my life has been tied to my son in ways that no words can ever fully capture. When I think back to those nights when he was just a baby, fragile and warm in my arms, I remember how I used to whisper promises into his tiny ears, promises that I would protect him, love him and give him everything I could, even if it meant sacrificing myself. There were times when I would stay awake through the night, rocking him as he cried, my arms aching, my eyes heavy, but my heart never wavering. I lived for those moments because he was the only light I had in my world. His father had left when he was too young to remember, leaving me to bear the weight of both mother and father, provider and nurturer, guide and protector. And I did it all with pride because he was my son, my reason, my world. We were not wealthy. Our lives were stitched together with scraps of courage and threads of sacrifice. I worked long hours, sometimes cleaning houses, sometimes working late shifts at diners, anything to put food on the table. I remember my hands being cracked and rough from scrubbing floors, my back bent from standing for hours, but I never complained. Every dollar I earned felt like a small stone laid on the path of his future. Every meal I skipped so that he could eat, every winter coat I went without so that he could be warm, was an act of love I never thought twice about. He deserved better than the life I had, and I was determined that he would have it. I can still picture the nights when he would sit at the small wooden table we had, bent over his schoolwork, while I stood in the kitchen, stretching a pot of soup to last just a little longer. He would ask me questions, his little voice curious and eager, and I would smile even though I was exhausted, explaining things to him as best as I could. Sometimes I barely understood the homework myself, but I tried because I wanted him to know I was there, that I believed in him. And when he would look up at me with those bright eyes and say, "Thanks, Mom," I felt richer than any millionaire in the world. There were days when life tested me more than I thought I could bear. Winter mornings when the cold crept into our small apartment, biting at my skin as I tried to keep him warm under the blankets. Summers when the heat made the room stifling, and I would fan him with old magazines until he fell asleep. There were nights when I cried quietly in the bathroom, pressing my fist against my mouth so he wouldn't hear, wondering if I was doing enough, if I could keep going. But every time doubt crept in, I only had to look at him sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling, to know that I had to keep going. For him, I could endure anything. Over the years, I gave him everything. Birthdays with cakes I baked myself, even when I couldn't afford the sugar. I would save coins in a jar for months just to buy him a toy he wanted, wrapping it carefully in leftover newspaper so he could tear it open with joy. Christmas mornings with gifts I had saved for months to buy, sometimes wrapping small secondhand toys just to see his smile. And the times when he was sick, burning with fever, I would sit by his bed, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, whispering prayers into the night, begging God to let him get better. He was my only family, my only joy. Every decision I made, every hardship I endured, was for him. As he grew older, I saw the man he was becoming. He was handsome, intelligent, ambitious. I watched with pride as he graduated high school, my heart swelling with tears in my eyes as he walked across that stage, his cap and gown swaying as he accepted his diploma. I clapped until my hands ached, shouting his name, feeling as though all the struggles had been worth it in that single moment. And when he went on to college, I worked even harder, sending him whatever money I could, sometimes going without electricity for a few days so that his tuition payment would go through. He never knew about those nights I sat in the dark, lighting candles so I could see, pretending it was romantic or fun, even though my heart was heavy with worry. I shielded him from the truth of my struggles, because I wanted him to soar without the weight of guilt pulling him down. He flourished. He excelled in his studies, made friends, built connections. Whenever he called to tell me about his achievements, I listened with pride swelling inside me, even as I sat in a chair with springs poking through the fabric or ate another meal of plain rice because money was tight. His success was my reward. His happiness was my treasure. When he came home with his degree, I was the proudest mother alive. He hugged me, thanking me, saying he couldn't have done it without me. I cried into his shoulder, my body shaking with relief and joy. That moment, I thought, was proof that all the pain had been worth it. He had become a man, a successful man, and I had done my part. I thought that from then on, our relationship would only grow stronger, that he would remember the sacrifices, that he would honor the bond we shared. I thought wrong. It wasn't long before he met the woman who would become his wife. I tried to be welcoming, tried to open my heart to her as I had always hoped someone would open theirs to him. She was polite at first, smiling, shaking my hand, but there was always something in her eyes, something sharp and calculating. I brushed it aside, telling myself it was just my imagination, that maybe I was being overprotective. After all, no woman would ever seem good enough for my son in my eyes. But over time I began to see the way she influenced him, the way she whispered in his ear, pulling him away from me. Suddenly he had less time for me, less patience, less warmth. Phone calls went unanswered, visits became rare, and when he did come, she was always there, guiding the conversation, keeping him close to her side. That I tried to stay silent, to keep peace. I reminded myself that love changes people, that marriage means new priorities. But deep down I felt the space between us growing wider, and it hurt in ways I cannot describe. It felt like losing him slowly, piece by piece, like watching sand slip through my fingers no matter how tightly I tried to hold on. Still, I loved him too much to say anything. I told myself that as long as he was happy, I could endure the loneliness. I could endure being set aside. Sometimes in the quiet of my room, I would look at old photographs of him. His baby pictures, his graduation photo, the little drawings he had made for me when he was a boy. I would trace the lines of his face with my fingers, whispering to myself, "He'll come back to me. He won't forget me." Those memories were all I had to hold on to, like a rope keeping me tethered to hope. But then came the day that would shatter everything. It was supposed to be a celebration, a happy occasion. He had called me, telling me there would be a special surprise for his mother-in-law. He wanted me there, wanted me to witness it. I didn't hesitate. I dressed carefully, choosing the nicest outfit I owned, a simple dress that I had worn on only a few occasions. I even curled my hair, put on a little lipstick, telling myself this would be a proud day, that I would see my son shine, and that maybe, just maybe, there would be something in it for me too. After all, I was his mother. Surely he would want to honor me as well. As I traveled to the gathering, my heart raced with anticipation. I imagined what it might be, perhaps a gift for me too, a sign that he still remembered everything I had done. Maybe not a car, of course, but something meaningful, something that showed he cared. I pictured a necklace maybe, or a heartfelt speech, maybe even just flowers. It didn't matter what it was. What mattered was the recognition, the acknowledgement that I was still important in his life. I told myself not to expect too much, but hope has a way of blooming even when you try to keep it buried. The house was full of people, laughter filling the air. His wife's family was there, her mother glowing with anticipation. I stood quietly in the corner, my hands clasped together, watching as everyone gathered outside. And then I saw it, the car. A shining BMW gleaming in the sunlight, with a giant red bow tied across the hood. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what was happening. My son, my boy, was giving his mother-in-law a luxury car. A gift beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and she gasped in delight, hugging him tightly as though he were her own son. I clapped politely, forcing a smile, but inside, something twisted painfully in my chest. I told myself, wait, he must have something for me too. He wouldn't invite me here just to watch this. He wouldn't. I held on to that hope with trembling hands, my eyes fixed on him, waiting. And that was the moment when the world I had built around him, the dreams and sacrifices, began to crumble. The sun was shining that afternoon, casting a golden warmth over the neighborhood as I approached the house. It was one of those days where everything seemed almost too bright, as if the world itself was mocking me with cheerfulness I didn't feel. The driveway was already full of cars, sleek and polished, and people were milling about in front of the house, chatting and laughing. I could hear music drifting from somewhere inside, light and festive. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, like a current running through the air. I tightened my grip on my handbag as I climbed the steps, my heart beating faster with every movement. A woman I recognized as my daughter-in-law's aunt greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You made it," she said, her voice polite but flat, before disappearing back into the crowd. I nodded, forcing a smile, trying not to let the sting of her coolness settle too deeply in my chest. I wasn't here for them. I was here for my son. Inside, the living room was bustling with guests. Tables were lined with food, platters of roasted meats, bowls of salads, shining trays of desserts that looked like they had come from an expensive bakery. The scent of spices and sugar hung heavy in the air. Balloons floated near the ceiling, tied in clusters of red and gold, the colors of celebration. Everyone seemed so at ease, chatting, laughing, glasses in hand. I felt like an outsider standing awkwardly near the doorway, clutching my handbag, unsure of where to place myself in this world that didn't feel like mine. Then I saw him, my son. He was standing near the center of the room, tall, confident, dressed in a crisp suit that fit him perfectly. He looked so grown, so polished, a man who belonged in this world of wealth and ease. My heart leapt as I watched him smile, watched the way people gravitated toward him, listening intently as he spoke. For a moment pride surged through me, washing away my unease. That was my boy. My son. The child I had raised with my own 2 hands. I approached slowly, hoping to catch his eye. And then he saw me. His face lit up briefly, though it quickly softened into something more restrained. He came toward me, hugging me lightly. "Mom," he said, his voice warm but distracted, as though he had 100 other things on his mind. "I'm glad you're here." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, my voice soft but filled with love. He smiled, but it was already fading as his wife appeared at his side, placing a hand on his arm. "It's almost time," she whispered to him, her eyes flicking briefly toward me before turning back to him. He nodded, excitement sparking in his eyes again, and I felt myself slip back into the background, like a shadow. Everyone was ushered outside, the crowd spilling onto the driveway, chatter rising into a hum of anticipation. The air was cooler now, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. I stood near the edge of the group, my heart racing as though I were about to witness something life-changing. Then, with a dramatic flourish, my son gestured toward the garage. The doors began to open slowly, almost theatrically, and the crowd erupted into gasps and whispers. And there it was. The car gleamed under the sunlight, its sleek black surface polished to perfection. The chrome accents sparkled, reflecting the faces of those gathered around. On the hood sat a massive red bow tied neatly, the kind you only ever see in commercials. It was breathtaking, the kind of gift that spoke not just of wealth but of grandeur, of status, of love meant to be displayed proudly. "Oh my God!" his mother-in-law cried, her hands flying to her mouth, tears instantly springing to her eyes. She stepped forward, trembling, her face awash with disbelief and joy. The crowd cheered, clapping loudly, cameras flashing as people scrambled to capture the moment. My son held out the keys with a broad smile, his arm extended toward her like a knight presenting a sword. "For you," he said proudly. She gasped again, throwing her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "I can't believe this," she sobbed, her voice breaking with emotion. "No one has ever done something like this for me." The crowd laughed and cheered louder, their joy echoing in the warm air. Phones were raised high, recording every angle of the spectacle, every teary smile, every glittering reflection on the car's surface. I clapped too, my hands coming together slowly, deliberately, each motion heavy with the effort it took to keep my expression pleasant. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. My heart twisted, my chest tightening as I watched my son beam with pride, watched his mother-in-law cry into his shoulder as though he were her own flesh and blood. I told myself to be patient. This was her moment. He had planned this for her. But surely there was something for me too. He wouldn't have asked me to come all this way just to watch. My eyes followed him as he guided her around the car, showing her every feature, laughing as she touched the leather seats, as she sat behind the wheel and honked the horn. She looked like a child on Christmas morning, glowing with happiness. And he looked like the perfect son-in-law, basking in the admiration of the crowd. But as the minutes ticked by, my smile began to falter. He hadn't looked at me again. Not once. It was as though I weren't even there. A group of his wife's relatives stood nearby, chatting excitedly. "He's such a wonderful son-in-law," one of them said loudly. "So generous. Look at that car. He treats her better than her own children do," another chimed in. Their words stung, piercing me like tiny daggers. I wanted to shout, "What about me? I am his mother. Do you know what I gave up for him? Do you know the nights I went hungry so he could eat? The years I worked myself to the bone so he could stand here today, smiling in his suit?" But I stayed silent. Instead, I stood there, clapping when everyone clapped, smiling when everyone cheered, my eyes fixed on him, waiting for the moment he would turn, the moment he would say, "And now for my mother." But that moment never came. The speeches began. He spoke about how much his mother-in-law meant to him, how she had welcomed him into her family, how she had supported him and his wife. His words were eloquent, filled with gratitude and affection. The crowd nodded, murmuring their approval, touched by his sincerity, and I felt invisible. Every word was a knife, cutting deeper into the fragile fabric of my hope. Not once did he mention me. Not once did he acknowledge the years of sacrifice, the endless love, the foundation that had carried him to this very moment. I stood in the shadows, my hands trembling, my throat tight with unspoken words. The applause that followed his speech was deafening. People surrounded his mother-in-law, congratulating her, admiring the car, praising my son. He stood tall, his arm around her, smiling for pictures, basking in the glow of their admiration, and I stood alone. The night air grew cooler as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. Laughter and chatter filled the driveway, but to me it all sounded distant, muffled, like echoes in a tunnel. My eyes blurred with unshed tears as I realized the truth that had been creeping toward me for years. I was no longer his priority. I was no longer his pride. I was no longer seen. That I pressed my lips together, forcing myself to hold it in, to stay composed. But inside my heart was breaking piece by piece, under the weight of betrayal I couldn't yet name. And then, just when I thought the night couldn't cut me deeper, he walked toward me, smiling, holding a small white envelope in his hand. He walked toward me with that smile. The same smile I had once lived for. The same smile that used to light up my darkest days. For a moment my heart leapt with hope. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. He hadn't forgotten me after all. The crowd was still buzzing around the car, but I saw him threading through, holding a small white envelope between his fingers. He stopped in front of me, his suit crisp, his cologne expensive, his face radiant from the applause still ringing in the air. "Here, Mom," he said simply, pressing the envelope into my hands. I looked at it, surprised. It was so small, so plain. No bow, no ribbon, no fanfare. Just an envelope. My fingers trembled as I took it, my heart racing with anticipation. Maybe it was a letter, I thought. Maybe he had written down his feelings, his gratitude. Maybe it was a check, something generous but private, something he didn't want to show off in front of everyone. That would make sense. That would explain why there was no speech, no announcement. That I held it delicately, like it contained the very thing I had been yearning for. Recognition. "Open it," he said, smiling, though his eyes were already drifting back toward the crowd. So I did. Slowly, carefully, as though stretching out the moment might give it more weight. My fingers slid along the flap, pulling out the contents. And there it was, $3 bills. Crisp, green, ordinary. My mind froze. For a second I thought I must have misunderstood. That maybe there was something else tucked inside. A note. Another slip of paper. I checked again, my fingers fumbling, searching desperately, but there was nothing. Just $3. The air seemed to vanish from around me. My chest tightened, my ears rang. The laughter of the crowd blurred into a distant hum, like I was underwater. I stared at the bills in my hand, unable to process what I was seeing. $3. I looked up at him, my eyes wide, silently begging for an explanation. But he was already turning away, his attention pulled back toward the cameras, the car, the people praising him. To him it was done. He had given me something, and that was enough. $3? I whispered to myself, my voice trembling, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. A woman nearby glanced at me, then quickly looked away, as if she didn't want to intrude on the humiliation she had just witnessed. Another guest chuckled softly under their breath, shaking their head. I caught fragments of whispers. "That's it. $3? Before they faded into the general buzz of conversation. Heat flooded my face, burning my cheeks as shame wrapped itself around me like a shroud. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. I wanted to disappear, to vanish from this scene where I had been reduced to nothing. I clutched the bills in my hand, the paper crumpling under the force of my grip. Memories flashed through my mind in rapid succession. Nights of hunger, mornings of exhaustion, years of sacrifice. Every time I had given him my last dollar, choosing his needs over mine. Every time I had told myself it was worth it because one day he would understand. One day he would honor me. One day he would remember. And here it was, the culmination of everything. $3. I felt sick. People were still laughing and celebrating around the car, taking pictures, posing with my son and his glowing mother-in-law. She was wiping tears of joy from her cheeks, holding the keys like they were made of gold. And I stood there in the shadows holding 3 crumpled bills, my heart breaking in silence. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. They were trapped somewhere deep inside, caught in the knot of disbelief lodged in my chest. Instead, I smiled weakly, forcing my lips upward, pretending as though I hadn't just been humiliated in the cruelest way imaginable. A man walked past me, clapping my son on the back. "You're amazing," he said loudly. "That's the kind of son every mother dreams of." The words stabbed into me. I nearly doubled over from the weight of them. Every mother's dream? No, this wasn't my dream. This was my nightmare. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth for everyone to hear, to tell them about the nights I had gone without food so my son could eat, about the double shifts, the endless hours, the sacrifices that had built the foundation beneath his feet, about how everything he had, the education, the confidence, the opportunities, had come from me. But I didn't. Instead, I stood still, silent, invisible, clutching my $3. The world around me blurred, colors and sounds blending together. I barely registered the music, the laughter, the popping of champagne corks. All I could see were those bills, those 3 meaningless, insulting bills. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. If he had given me nothing at all, I could have understood. If he had simply hugged me and said, "Thank you, Mom. I love you," my heart would have been full. But $3? That wasn't just neglect. That was mockery. That was erasure. That was the measure of my worth in his eyes. $3. The number echoed in my mind, bouncing against the walls of my skull until it became unbearable. 3. I slipped the bills back into the envelope, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to do with them. They felt toxic, like poison burning my skin. I wanted to throw them away, to tear them into pieces, but I couldn't. Not yet. Because somehow they were all I had left of this moment, this revelation. Proof of the truth I had tried so hard to deny. The truth that my son no longer saw me as the night wore on. I drifted through the celebration like a ghost, unnoticed, unacknowledged. People toasted, laughed, sang. His mother-in-law kissed his cheek, calling him the best son anyone could ask for. I watched it all in silence, my heart heavy, my soul aching, and with every passing second, the distance between us grew wider, until it felt like an unbridgeable chasm. By the time the crowd began to thin, I knew something had broken inside me, something that could never be mended. That night, long after the laughter had faded and the guests had gone home, I sat alone in my small room, the envelope on the table before me. The 3 bills inside were smoothed out, laid side by side, staring back at me like an accusation. I couldn't look away. They seemed to glow in the dim lamplight, every crease and fold magnified, every number mocking me. .3. I whispered the word aloud, the sound strange in the stillness of the room. My voice cracked hollow. $3. That's what I'm worth. The words lingered in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. I pressed my hands to my face, and for the first time that night, the tears finally came. They spilled hot and fast, soaking my palms, burning tracks down my cheeks. My chest heaved as sobs tore through me. Raw and uncontrollable, I cried for the little boy I had raised, for the man he had become, for the bond one thought we shared. I cried for the years I had given, the pieces of myself I had sacrificed, the dreams I had buried so he could build his own. I cried because in that envelope, in those 3 pitiful bills, all of it had been erased. My mind flooded with memories, each one sharper than the last. I saw myself at 22, holding him in my arms for the first time. His tiny hand wrapped around my finger, his eyes blinking up at me with a trust so pure it broke me open. I had promised him then, silently, that I would give him the world. And I had tried. I saw myself scrubbing floors on my knees until they bled, my body aching with exhaustion, just to make enough money to buy him shoes. I remembered walking past store windows, staring at dresses I could never afford, reminding myself that every dollar spent on me was a dollar not spent on him. I saw the nights when he had fevers, when I stayed awake whispering prayers, begging for his health. I saw the mornings when I kissed his forehead before running off to work, my stomach empty because I had given him the last of the bread. And then I saw him years later, standing tall and proud in his suit, handing his mother-in-law the keys to a brand new BMW, his face radiant with love and pride, while I stood in the shadows holding $3. The contrast was unbearable. It split me in two. I spoke into the silence, my voice shaking, rising and falling like waves. I was there when you had nothing. When all you owned was a blanket and a toy car. I was there when you were afraid of the dark, when you needed me to chase away the monsters. I was there when you wanted to give up, when you doubted yourself. I told you you could do it. I told you you were strong. I carried you when you were weak. I gave you everything I had, and when that wasn't enough, I gave more. And now? Now you give me $3. $3 for a lifetime. The bitterness in my words startled even me. It was a sharpness I wasn't used to hearing in my own voice. But it was the truth that I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling through blurry eyes. Is this what I mean to you? Is this what motherhood is worth? Did you think I wouldn't notice the insult? Or did you know and not care? The room was silent, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The stillness pressed against me, amplifying the weight of my words. I remembered his graduation day, the way he had hugged me, whispering, "Thank you, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you." Back then I had believed him. I had clung to those words like a lifeline, but words I realized now were easy. Actions were harder. And his actions had spoken louder than anything else. That I picked up the bills again, holding them between my fingers. They felt flimsy, fragile. I could tear them in half with the slightest effort. I thought about doing it, about ripping them into shreds and letting the pieces scatter across the floor. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because as much as they hurt, they were a symbol, not of value but of truth. A truth I needed to face. The truth that he no longer saw me as his mother, as the woman who had given him everything. To him, I was just an obligation, a footnote in his story, someone he had to acknowledge, but only barely. The realization cut deeper than anything else ever had. I stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The street outside was quiet, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights. Cars were parked neatly along the curb, their metal surfaces glinting softly. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, its sound lonely and hollowed. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, closing my eyes. How did we get here? I whispered. How did love turn into this emptiness? I thought of all the times I had defended him, even when others criticized him. Of all the times I had told myself he was just busy, just distracted, just adjusting to a new life. I had excused the missed phone calls, the forgotten visits, the hurried conversations. I had convinced myself he still loved me, that he still cared. But tonight there was no more room for excuses. The truth was clear, undeniable, cruel. He didn't see me anymore. And worse, when he did see me, he saw me as worth only $3. That I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, pulling my knees to my chest. The sobs came again, harsh and ragged, tearing through me until I was empty. I cried for the boy I had lost, for the mother I had been, for the bond that had been severed beyond repair. When the tears finally subsided, I sat in the quiet, my body trembling, my breath shallow. The room felt colder, the shadows deeper. The envelope still sat on the table, a cruel reminder of what had transpired. I whispered again, softer this time, almost like a prayer. I gave you everything, and you gave me $3. The silence answered back. And in that silence, a decision began to form, small and fragile at first, but growing stronger with every passing second, because I knew now that I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep clinging to memories while being erased in the present. I couldn't keep waiting for recognition that would never come. Something inside me shifted that night. A line was drawn. And though my heart was still breaking, I knew that soon I would have to make a choice, for my dignity, for my sanity, for the love I once had for myself. But before I could decide, I had to face the full weight of the truth, and so I sat there in the dim light, whispering to myself the words that hurt the most but needed to be spoken. He doesn't love me anymore. Morning came, but it brought no light to my heart. The sun filtered through the thin curtains, spilling across the floor, yet everything inside me felt gray, hollow. My eyes were swollen from crying, my body heavy from exhaustion. I had barely slept, the night stretching endlessly as my mind replayed the same images again and again. The bow on the car, the applause, the envelope, the $3 bills. Always the $3 bills. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope on the table. It was still there, untouched, as if waiting for me to make a decision about what it meant. A part of me wanted to leave it behind, to pretend it didn't exist. But another part of me knew it was more than paper. It was a message I could no longer ignore. I reached for it, holding it in my hands once more. My fingers traced the edges, trembling slightly. And then, almost without thinking, I spoke aloud, my voice steady this time, firm in a way it hadn't been the night before. No more. The words startled me. They were simple but powerful, final. They echoed in the small room, resonating in the hollow places inside me, and no more waiting for him to see me. No more excuses for his neglect. No more humiliation that I had loved him with everything I had. But love, I realized now, could not survive on its own. It needed respect, recognition, reciprocity. And without those it withered, turning into pain. That pain had consumed me for too long, and I could not let it consume me any longer. I stood and walked to the closet, pulling out a small suitcase. The zipper hissed as I opened it, the sound strangely liberating. One by one, I began folding my clothes, placing them neatly inside. Each item I packed felt like another step toward reclaiming myself, toward drawing the boundary I should have drawn long ago. As I moved through the room, memories clung to me like shadows. The sweater I had knitted during the long winter nights when he was a child. The scarf I had worn to his school events, cheering louder than anyone else in the crowd. Even the old coat that had kept me warm during those endless bus rides to work. Rides I took so he could have what I never did. That I paused, holding the coat to my chest, the fabric worn and soft against my cheek. Tears threatened again, but I held them back. I couldn't cry anymore. I had to be strong now. Strong enough to let go. When the suitcase was full, I zipped it shut and set it by the door. The sound of the zipper closing felt like a seal, a finality. There was no going back now. I sat down once more, my phone in my hand. His name stared back at me from the screen, familiar and foreign all at once. I hovered over it, my thumb trembling. Blocking him felt unthinkable. He was my son. My child. The one I had carried, nursed, raised. How could a mother block her own flesh and blood? But then I remembered the look on his face as he handed me that envelope. Not cruel, not angry, but indifferent. Detached. I wasn't his mother in that moment. I was an afterthought. An obligation. That memory steeled me. My thumb pressed down. A confirmation message popped up. Are you sure you want to block this contact? I stared at it for a long moment, my heart pounding. And then with a deep breath I pressed yes. The screen went blank. His name vanished from my contact list, leaving behind an emptiness that felt both devastating and liberating. I sat there in the silence, the weight of the decision settling over me. My chest ached, my stomach churned, but beneath the pain there was something else. Something small but undeniable. Relief. For years I had clung to him, waiting, hoping, begging silently for scraps of love. And now for the first time I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't begging. I wasn't holding on to a hope that only hurt me. That I had let go. The hours slipped by quietly as I prepared to leave. I wrote a note, short and simple, and placed it on the table where the envelope had been. I love you, but I cannot stay where I am not valued. When you remember who I am, you'll know where to find me. I signed it with nothing more than Mom.
No flerist, no explanaschen.
He wouldn't understand now, but perhaps one day, he would. When the suitcase was ready and the note in place, I stood in the doorway, taking one last look around the room. It wasn't much, but it had been mine. A refuge, even if a small one. Now it would be just another empty space, another place I had outgrown. I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking softly, and walked away. Each step down the hall felt heavy, final, but necessary. Outside, the morning air was cool against my face, the sky pale with the promise of a new day. I breathed it in deeply, filling my lungs, letting it cleanse me as I walked down the street, suitcase in hand. I thought about the years ahead. They wouldn't be easy, I knew that. I was still alone, still uncertain of what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of strength inside me. A strength born not from hope in someone else, but from the decision to honor myself. Because love, even a mother's love, cannot thrive where it is only taken for granted. And so I walked on, leaving behind the son I had once given everything to, carrying only the pieces of myself I still had left, determined to rebuild, to heal, to live. The $3 remained behind on the table inside the envelope next to the note. A symbol of what had been lost, and of what I had finally found. The courage to choose myself. The train rattled softly beneath me as I sat by the window, my suitcase tucked against my legs. The city blurred past, buildings and trees melting together into a haze of muted color. I rested my forehead against the glass, the cool surface grounding me, and let the rhythm of the rails seep into my bones. Each mile that passed felt like a mile between me and the life I had just left behind. For the first time in years I felt weightless. Not happy, not free, not yet. But lighter, as though I had finally set down a burden I had been carrying so long I had forgotten what it felt like to walk without it. The ache was still there, of course. It pressed against my chest with every breath, a reminder of the love I still carried for him, the love that would never truly fade. But alongside the ache there was something else. Clarity that I thought about the envelope, the 3 bills, the insult and the wound. For so long I had measured my worth through his eyes, through his recognition, his validation. I had believed that one day, he would honor me the way I had dreamed. But life had shown me a harsher truth. Love cannot be forced. Respect cannot be begged for. And dignity cannot be sacrificed. Not even for a child. As the train sped on, I closed my eyes and let the memories come. Some were painful, jagged shards of nights spent crying into my pillow, of exhaustion so deep I could barely stand. But others were bright, glowing with warmth, the sound of his laughter as a boy, the feel of his small hand gripping mine, the pride in his eyes the first time he rode his bike without help. Those memories were mine, untouchable, unspoiled. They were the truth of what I had given, and no gift, no BMW, no envelope could erase them. That I whispered softly to myself, I was a good mother. The words surprised me, but they rang true. I had doubted myself for so long, questioning whether I had done enough, whether I had failed him somehow. But in that moment I knew. I had done more than enough. I had given everything. And that was not nothing. That was everything. The train slowed as it approached the next station, and I watched people on the platform, waiting with bags and children, their faces full of anticipation. A young mother held her toddler in her arms, kissing his forehead as he squirmed and giggled. My chest tightened at the sight, a bittersweet ache spreading through me. Once that had been me. Once I had held that same hope in my arms, believing love was enough to carry us both through anything. But life had taught me that love without respect is a fragile thing. It bends and bends until it finally breaks. The train lurched forward again, carrying me further away. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes. Slowly, I let go of the pain piece by piece, as though untying knots that had bound me for too long. I didn't know where this journey would take me. Maybe I would find work in another city. Maybe I would rent a small apartment and build a quiet life for myself. Maybe someday he would realize what he had lost and come searching for me. Or maybe he wouldn't. But whatever happened, I knew one thing. I would no longer live unseen. I would no longer measure my worth by the scraps handed to me. I was more than $3. I was more than the silence he had left me in. I was a mother. A woman. A human being deserving of love, dignity, and respect. And if the world refused to give me those things, then I would give them to myself. The landscape outside shifted, the city fading into fields and open skies. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with air that felt new, clean. A sense of peace began to settle over me, fragile but real, like the first bloom of spring after a long winter. I whispered one last time, not to him but to myself. Sometimes letting go is the only way to survive. And in that whisper I felt the first stirrings of freedom. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time that was enough.